The air tasted like burnt metal and betrayal. 40 acres of wheat, my retirement plan, my therapy, my last link to Sarah, now lay in blackened rows stretching to the horizon. Smoke spiraled upward like a funeral prayer. Ash clung to my sleeves. My boots sank into soil still warm from the blaze that had eaten 2 years of sweat in less than 20 minutes. But the worst part wasn't the fire. It was the woman standing 50 feet away. Delilah Prescott, HOA president, suburban monarch, and self-appointed guardian of prairie estates, angled a garden hose toward her rose bushes while firefighters battled the inferno devouring my land. Every drop went to her flowers, not the flames. When she caught me staring, she lifted her hand in a cheerful wave, like we were neighbors chatting over a fence. "Rough morning, Judge Blackwood," she called, smiling like she was complimenting my lawn, not watching my livelihood burn. "Judge." She said it like a joke, as if being a sitting agricultural law judge was nothing more than a quirky hobby. If only she knew what Monday would bring. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I inherited this land after my wife passed. 200 acres of Kansas soil that held the memories of my grandfather, my father, and every season of my life. During weekdays, I sat behind a bench deciding land disputes. Nights and weekends, I traded the robe for dirt-stained denim and the steady hum of a combine. Farming steadied me during the years cancer stole Sarah piece by piece. Then the subdivision arrived. Prairie estates, 47 copy-and-paste houses filled with folks seeking quiet country living. Most were good people. A few even brought pie. But neighborhoods always have one person who believes rules should bend for them and break for everyone else. For us, that person was Delilah. She rolled in with a perfect smile, a spotless BMW, and a desire to reshape rural Kansas into her personal gated utopia. Within 6 months, she had bullied her way into HOA presidency. Within 8, she had filed more complaints against my farm than the county had seen in a decade. Noise from tractors. Dust from harvest. Roosters crowing. Fertilizer odors. Sprinklers. Sunlight glinting off metal roofs. My existence offended her. The letters, the fines, the threats, it was a slow, methodical war disguised as community standards. But everything escalated the day she discovered the agricultural access easement my grandfather secured in the 70s. A legal right she couldn't revoke, rewrite, or control. After her lawyer failed to break it in court, she took matters into her own hands. One morning I found the access road blocked with decorative landscaping boulders, expensive ones, the kind that belonged outside luxury spas, not in a Kansas field. The sheriff shrugged. Delilah presented a forged permit. I couldn't prove it. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just nosy. She was dangerous. 2 months before harvest, herbicide drift killed 3 acres of wheat along our shared boundary. Coincidentally, Delilah had hired landscapers the night before, on a windy evening any licensed applicator would have avoided. The contractor's protest was caught clearly on my new trail cameras, right before Delilah ordered him to just spray. That footage changed everything. And so did the neighbors who began quietly approaching me with their own Delilah horror stories. Fines for gardens, threats over work trucks, children's toys labeled visual clutter. It wasn't just me. She was terrorizing an entire community. And the fire, the one that burned my field to ash. It wasn't an accident. But the moment I realized that was also the moment I understood something even bigger. Delilah had no idea who she'd targeted. Because this time, the farmer she tried to break was the judge who would end her reign. But the fire was only the beginning. What Delilah did next would turn a neighborhood feud into a full-scale criminal war, and I was about to catch her in the act. The morning after the herbicide incident, I walked the fence line with a sick feeling deep in my gut. 3 acres of dead wheat doesn't just hurt, it's a warning shot. The soil was still wet with chemical residue, the stalks limp and brown as river weeds. But the footage I captured told the real story. Delilah directing her landscaper like a general placing artillery. She didn't spray weeds, she sprayed my livelihood. And the moment I saved that clip in 3 different secure drives, I knew Delilah had crossed a line she couldn't walk back over. But something unexpected happened in the days that followed, the whispers. Neighbors who once offered polite nods now approached me quietly at the grocery store, in front yards, at mailbox clusters. Mrs. Aurora showed me a stack of HOA violation letters taller than a Bible study workbook, everyone targeting her butterfly garden. The Peterson kids couldn't have a basketball hoop because sound disturbance. Mr. Rodriguez had a $300 fine for parking his work truck in his own driveway. People weren't just annoyed, they were scared. Delilah wasn't running an HOA. She was running a petty fiefdom where rules were weapons. Then came the next escalation. Fire trucks roared onto my property before dawn after an anonymous, hazardous chemical report. Hazmat suits, flashing lights, strangers probing my barns like I was hiding a meth lab instead of fertilizer tanks. Chief Martinez, an old high school teammate, shook his head as he scanned readings that showed nothing but clean storage and compliant logs. "Someone's playing games," he muttered. "Not someone. Delilah." Her kitchen window glowed with soft yellow light as she sipped a drink and watched the scene like it was premium cable. 3 more baseless inspections followed: county health, environment, agriculture. Hours of delays. Hours stolen from harvest prep. Hours she knew I couldn't afford. The pattern was unmistakable. And so was her mistake. Every emergency call was logged. Every caller ID recorded. 6 false reports in 2 weeks, all from the same number. Kansas law had a name for that: abuse of emergency services. A felony. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a cup of bitter coffee and a sense of grim clarity settling over me. Delilah thought she was burying me in paperwork, panic, and public humiliation. Instead, she was digging her own legal grave, call by call, lie by lie. Then she overplayed her hand. The HOA announced an emergency meeting to vote on a new rule. No farming equipment could operate before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. Anyone who knows agriculture knows that's a death sentence. Harvest runs on weather, not HOA office hours. So I walked into that meeting still wearing my judge's robe, straight from a long day in court. The room fell quiet as I took a seat in the back. Delilah's smile tightened like a drawn bowstring. And when her so-called agricultural noise expert, her brother-in-law, a timeshare salesman, finished his ridiculous presentation, I stood and read the Kansas right to farm statute aloud. A law she had apparently never bothered to study. A law that made her entire ordinance illegal. Her supporters scattered like quail flushed from brush. The meeting collapsed. But Delilah didn't back down. She never backs down. And that's when things turned from harassment into criminal intent. Because the next time Delilah came for me, she wouldn't use HOA letters or fake complaints. She would use fire. And she'd bring help. 2 nights before harvest, Miguel's voice crackled through my radio with the urgency of a man who'd seen something he wished he hadn't. "Boss. South Field. Bring the camera. And hurry." His tone alone told me this wasn't another HOA stunt or a stray raccoon tripping motion sensors. I grabbed my flashlight, my phone, and sprinted across the gravel, heart pounding in my throat. Miguel crouched behind the combine, eyes fixed on 2 shapes moving along the fence line. The moonlit silhouettes were unmistakable. Even in the dim glow, Delilah's perfectly styled hair shimmered like a lighthouse beacon of bad intentions. She wasn't alone. A man I'd never seen was with her, tall, wiry, moving with the smooth certainty of someone who had done this before. They worked in silence, setting out gasoline-soaked hay bales and metal canisters around the driest edge of my wheat. The sharp, oily scent of fuel drifted across the field, curling into my lungs with a sting that made anger rise like heat in my chest. My phone recorded everything: Delilah whispering instructions, her accomplice drenching hay with accelerant, the methodical layout of a blaze engineered to spread fast and erase evidence. I called 911 with one hand and kept filming with the other. They slipped away moments before the deputies arrived, but they left behind everything I needed: fingerprinted fuel cans, accelerant patterns, footprints, and high-definition proof. "This isn't vandalism," Deputy Morrison said as he sealed the evidence bags. "This is organized agricultural arson. Minimum 10 years if a prosecutor breathes on it." He didn't know Delilah like I did. She wouldn't breathe, she'd choke. That night, long after law enforcement left, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents from 3 states, records I'd quietly pulled using judicial databases. What I found chilled me more than the night air. This wasn't Delilah's first rodeo. She had a history. California vineyards torched to ash. Organic farms crippled by lawsuits. A horse ranch forced to sell after mysterious fires. Every time, land sold at bargain prices to the same development company. Every time, Delilah collected consulting fees. She wasn't a bored suburban bully. She was a professional saboteur disguised as a community leader. And now she'd made the mistake of targeting someone with the legal knowledge, the network, and the stubbornness to dismantle her entire operation. I printed everything: financial trails, real estate transfers, complaint histories, chemical purchases, HOA minutes. Piece by piece, her empire of whispered threats and scorched earth came into focus. She had taken farms from widows, retirees, immigrant families. But she'd come to Kansas expecting another easy win. Instead, she'd found a judge with a burned field and a long memory. The irony. She had a civil hearing scheduled in my courtroom Monday morning. A simple fence dispute. Her lawyer had no idea his client had tried to torch my livelihood 2 nights earlier. Delilah didn't know she was walking into a courtroom where every lie she told would be recorded. Where every word would bind her tighter to the charges I was preparing. Where justice would wait for her behind the bench she assumed she could manipulate. Because before Delilah ever sat in front of my gavel, she made one last desperate move, and this time, she didn't come quietly. Harvest morning was supposed to smell like dry wheat and diesel, not fear. But at 4:23 a.m., every alarm on my property erupted at once. Motion sensors, perimeter cameras, barn alerts. I bolted upright just as the feed from my storage shed lit up on screen. 2 figures moved with the confidence of burglars who had rehearsed the choreography. Delilah was there, unmistakable in the harsh night vision glow, and beside her was the same man from the earlier arson attempt. But this time, they weren't playing with hay bales. They brought industrial-grade accelerants, metal sprayers, and devices that looked far too much like ignition timers. "Make it look like faulty wiring," Delilah whispered, her voice sharp as a knife. "Old buildings burn fast. No one will question it." That sentence alone was enough to bury her. I watched, fists clenched, as they coated the shed holding 80% of my harvested grain, in a gleaming layer of accelerant. My stomach twisted. That grain wasn't just income. It was 3 generations of Blackwood sweat sealed in those wooden walls. Hundreds of hours. Thousands of dollars. The legacy I promised Sarah I would protect. Fire crews tore down my driveway 6 minutes after I called, but by then orange flames were clawing up the walls like hungry beasts. The heat hit me at 50 yards, an unbearable wave that stung my eyes and blistered the air. Firefighters battled the blaze while I stood helpless, watching decades of heritage collapse in glowing embers. When the flames finally surrendered, 70% of my grain was saved, but the loss was still staggering. $50,000 of wheat turned into black dust drifting through the dawn. The sight hollowed something inside me. But Delilah wasn't done making mistakes. In her arrogance, she made the kind of error only a fraud amateur makes. She filed an insurance claim for smoke damage 2 hours before the fire actually started. The timestamp alone was enough to make federal investigators salivate. When insurance investigator Janet Walsh showed me the digital logs, she laughed. Actually laughed. "In 30 years, she said, I've never seen anyone file paperwork for a fire they hadn't lit yet. This is federal fraud gift-wrapped with a bow." News cameras arrived before noon, expecting to roast me alive in a scandal. Delilah had fed them a story about a rogue judge committing insurance fraud and terrorizing a peaceful community. What she didn't expect was that reporters had done their homework. The moment they confronted her with security footage, accelerant residue reports, and the early insurance filing, she snapped. Completely. On live television, she ranted about corrupt farmers, terrorist agriculture operations, and insider conspiracies. Her lawyer tried to pull her away, but the damage was done. The meltdown went viral in hours. That night, after the cameras left and the firefighters packed up, I sat on the porch watching the last embers fade. Miguel handed me a cold beer and asked quietly, "She doesn't know about Monday, does she?" I shook my head. "She thinks she's walking into a routine HOA case." Miguel grinned. "Then she's about to learn what justice really tastes like." Because when Delilah walked into my courtroom believing she'd win a civil dispute, she had no idea federal agents were waiting in the front row, with handcuffs. Monday morning arrived with an energy that felt electric, like the moments before a storm breaks. The Millfield County Courthouse was never quiet, but that day it hummed, whispers, boots on tile, reporters adjusting cameras, farmers in their cleanest flannels lining the back wall. Every seat was filled. Word had spread. Delilah Prescott, Queen of Prairie Estates, was about to face the one man she never should have crossed. And she still didn't know it. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Delilah strutted in wearing a pale blue designer suit, chin lifted, confidence radiating like a perfume cloud. She didn't even look at the gallery, just marched toward counsel table with her lawyer, Patterson, who seemed smug enough to believe victory was inevitable. They expected a simple fence-line dispute. A petty civil hearing. An easy win. But when Patterson finally looked up at the bench and registered my nameplate, the color drained from his face like someone had pulled the plug on him. Delilah froze beside him, eyes widening, breath catching in her throat. She opened her mouth, maybe to object, maybe to scream, but Patterson, too rattled to think straight, waved recusal. And just like that, the trap snapped shut. She testified first, playing the role she'd perfected, innocent neighbor, victim of unruly farmers, champion of community integrity. She lectured the court about her responsibility to protect families from agricultural hazards. Then she uttered the phrase that sealed her fate. Sometimes you have to take strong measures to stop agricultural threats. Her voice carried across the silent courtroom, every syllable captured by recorders, cameras, and the federal agents seated quietly in the front row. I asked a few neutral questions, just enough rope for her to tie the knot herself. And she did, eagerly, unknowingly, describing her pattern of decisive action against landowners. She thought she was building her civil case. Instead, she was confessing to a federal crime spree. The doors opened mid-testimony. Deputy Morrison entered, followed by federal agents in dark suits. He handed me a stack of documents, warrants. Real ones. Signed. Final. Your Honor, Morrison announced, his voice echoing through the tense, breathless room, we are here to serve arrest warrants for Mrs. Delilah Prescott. Patterson nearly fell out of his chair. Delilah went rigid, gripping the table so hard her knuckles bleached white. Charges were read aloud: agricultural terrorism, arson, mail fraud, conspiracy, insurance fraud. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled like their lives depended on it. And then Delilah erupted. It wasn't screaming, it was something primal. She shrieked that she was being targeted by corrupt farmers, that the court system was conspiring against lawful homeowners, that she'd burn the entire county down before letting agricultural criminals win. Federal agents didn't flinch as they cuffed her, guiding her out while she hurled threats at everyone. Journalists, deputies, me. You don't know who you're dealing with, she shouted. I'll destroy all of you. Ironically, those outbursts added years to her sentencing. 6 months later, justice landed hard. Delilah and her accomplice were convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to terms that made her HOA presidency feel like a forgotten dream. Prairie Estates dissolved its HOA, residents reclaimed their peace, and my land, scarred but standing, entered its most fertile years yet. And the Sarah Blackwood Agricultural Heritage Foundation was born, funded by Delilah's civil judgment, dedicated to protecting farmers from HOA harassment across the Midwest. So, if you're watching this thinking no one can beat a power-drunk HOA tyrant, remember this: sometimes the smallest towns deliver the biggest justice. And sometimes the person a bully chooses to fight turns out to be the worst possible opponent. And if you think this story was wild, wait until you hear about the building inspector who tried to shut down a Marine veteran's food truck and ended up in front of a judge who refused to play games.